We were just playing around with the blanket stitch applique options on the Pfaff Creative icon, but now I want to show you the satin stitch options. Now this is a one stitch that people will often think that we just want to go to a zigzag, but I want to show you what happens on this machine. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that when you go to shorten the stitch length, it stops at 1.5. So it never really closes up the zigzag. And people go, well, how do I get a satin stitch? Well, actually, you have the best satin stitch built into this machine. It's stitch number 12 in menu 1. And it's not just a zigzag like you were used to probably on previous machines. We actually have a better than a zigzag for satin stitch. Now, one thing I do notice that it does come up at 6 millimeters wide. Tell you the truth, I usually don't need it that wide, so the first thing I usually do is reduce the width. But what I'm going to do first is actually lengthen this out just a little bit, because you can see that it's not just a zig and zag, kind of down each time. It actually goes down and then straight across. Down and straight across, and it gives the beautiful look of that filled in stitch that you're looking for applique. So that would be done when you're stitching around a raw edge and want it to be completely covered. Great for if you're going to be washing it and handling it a lot. Maybe it becomes a child's favorite item. It's going to be washed, so you want it to look good for a long time. A blanket stitch around a raw edge is minimally held, where a satin stitch is going to be ultimately held. Now, before I get into some of my tricks that I like to share with that, I want to mention that I use a satin stitch quite a few times in our Pfaff Stitching Cosmos online course. Now, this particular block we did with the radiant stitches. Now, there's a straight stitch between each of these stitches on this block, but when I was done, I covered them up with that satin stitch all the way around. Now, again, I don't always use just the zigzag. There are so many stitches in this machine that have a zigzag part to them, which are also great for applique. So if you see here, this went all the way around the orange circle we applied to this block when we stitched with the circular sewing attachment. So it still did the job of covering up the raw edge, but it has a much more fun finished look. So depending on what you're looking for, if you are looking for ways to increase your creative options with this machine, I highly recommend that you check out the 10 free videos that we have in the links below this YouTube video, where you can check out that course. Okay, back to the stitch. I mentioned that our stitch width usually is a little wide for me, so somewhere in the 3 to 4 millimeters wide will be something that I will keep. Now, the stitch length starts at 1.0. Now, the machine does not know what thickness of thread you are using, so I use a lot of embroidery weight thread for some of my stitching blocks that I was showing you, so it's a little thinner. So sometimes I do need to come in and just shorten the stitch length just enough so it becomes really dense and filled in. If you have a little thicker thread, you don't want it to pile up. Now, we also are going to be using the foot, the open toe foot that comes with this machine, and then that way you can see where you're going. Highly recommend that as well. Makes it really easy to follow. Now, look, one more thing here on screen. You notice that this stitch is center needle position, so you do have that option to guide the little red mark that you'll see close up in a second along the raw edge of that fabric. But sometimes I'll even come into the needle position. So touch the little picture of the zigzag, and you can shift this stitch a little bit to the left, and I'll show you how perfect that will make it. So we'll start with the default settings, and then I'll show you how I sometimes shift it to be a little bit more coverage. You want more of the zigzag on the applique fabric than on the base fabric. Make sure your IDT is engaged if it's not already. And let's go ahead and just lower the presser foot, touch the button once, and then touch it again so you can move it over so you can line up with that red line in the center. Now, as I start off, let's talk about that. You're going to see that the stitch is half on the light blue and half on the dark blue. I'm really not catching as much of the applique fabric as I would wish. So normally that means that I am wanting to stitch more towards this side. This is what you're looking for, more stitch on the applique fabric. And as that needle comes right on over to the right, it should be going down right next to the raw edge. Well, now I don't really have anything to follow. So what if we were to change that needle position? And you're going to see it actually move right there as I touch it. So I'm moving the needle over. So it is lined up with the red line, and then I'm going to adjust my fabric. And now I have something to follow the red line and the raw edge of the fabric, and I don't have to do as much thinking as I stitch. Now, if you want to see me turn a corner, let's just go all the way to the end. This fabric is not fused down at all, which is okay for today. But I am going to stop with the needle down on the right side and then pivot around here. Now, I am noticing that my stitches aren't as solid as they could be. So let's go ahead and shorten this stitch length by one little touch and bring those stitches so they are fully, oh yeah, much better. Let's just take a look and see how that actually, what the difference is with where I started and where I ended. So you can see a little bit of the light blue coming through. I could bring that down just another little touch closer and take it from 0.9 to 0.8, and I think that would be as solid as I would want it to be. But isn't that a nice way of doing a satin stitch? But of course, don't forget, try out some of those other stitches in your machine that can also be used for applique.